All right, welcome to the next section of our city and metro planning class lessons. This section is going to focus on the urbanization of America, and we're going to do a whole section on urbanization because really planning, the history of urban planning, it's about a response to urbanization and the problems that we see from an urbanizing population. So this first section will look at the 19th century, which is roughly the 100 years between 1800 and 1900. So the learning objectives in this module, module 2 on urbanization is at the end I want you to be able to describe three main forces behind urban growth and why urban concentration increased in the 19th century. Throughout all these sections, I want you at the end to be able to identify different technologies and the impact that these technologies had on both urban growth and then later the impact technologies had on decline. And I want you to be able to discuss some of the trends that we see in urban population in the 20th century. So let's talk about the urban population in the U.S. This 100-year period between 1800 and 1900, we saw a huge growth in the urban population. That would be the population that is urban as opposed to rural, which is living out in the country, living out in farmlands. So in 1800, the total population was 5 million. And then 100 years later, the total population was 76 million. So this is a big increase. Now, urban residents were 300,000. That jumped to 30 million over the century. And then in about 1800, 90% of the U.S. labor force was engaged in farming. I mean, it was an agricultural economy. We were farmers. And then by 1900, 50% of the labor force was engaged in farming. So that's a big decrease in those who are doing farming and a huge increase of those that are moving to urban areas. So that's just a little bit about the numbers of the population increase. Okay, so why did this happen? This idea of urban growth, what were the forces behind it? Okay, so part of it was the overall population growth in the United States. It was huge. Like this had to do with both birth, just the number of people being born, but it also had to do with immigration. So it wasn't just this kind of surge in births. It was new people plus the immigration. So the U.S. population just exploded. And then I'm sure you'll remember from your history classes the Industrial Revolution. Industrialization and urbanization are linked. So with the Industrial Revolution, what we had is this agricultural machinery replaced farmers and freed them to take up other employment. That was a big factor. And then the other thing was through the Industrial Revolution is we had factories. So factory production created this need for workers, for labor at specific points. So workers had to move towards to the factories. And from this, you also had modern corporations, department stores. These are all kind of things that came out of the Industrial Revolution. And then in addition, like another force behind urban growth is transportation. You're going to see transportation come up a lot. So low cost transportation was another force behind urban growth. I mean, railroads and steamboats, these were relatively inexpensive ways to get around. Okay, so some more forces that increase the population. This is really just kind of a recap of what we already mentioned, is that you had national population growth. The population of the entire country was exploding. You had this increased agricultural productivity because you could be more productive on the farm. That freed people up to move and take jobs in the city. And then you had the growth of factory production, people moving towards factories, towards cities to work on these production lines, and the development of low-cost transportation. So when we get together in class, I want you to be able to describe some technologies that contribute to this population density. Okay, so what did the cities look like in the 19th century? What did they look like? Two of the biggest characteristics are concentration and density. Those are distinguishing characteristics, and I want you to think through what that means. So, but kind of look at this picture of the city. You see here the ships and the vessels in the water. port cities. Cities are built near water transportation. I mean, think about any city that you know, there's a big river there. And that's because the cities were built on rivers, because this was a way to concentrate economic activities. The ships would bring in the goods, and that's where it all started. And so you start seeing this idea that spaces between buildings vanished. Buildings got taller. You have these, I mean, you can see the buildings here. You have this like human-made environment, the built environment, rather than a green environment. You don't see a lot of open spaces, park spaces. Everything's really concentrated, heavy, this man-made environment. And you also have this idea where everything's really close together. I mean, look how close the factories in the background of this picture are spewing out their pollution. But look, there's like those factories right next to these housing units up front, right up against the river, the water transportation. So people walked to work. So jobs, homes, all really close together. So that's kind of what we mean by concentration and density. And you can look at this picture of New York. We're talking about kind of some of these trends where buildings got taller. So you can see, even technologies like the invention of the elevator allowed buildings to get taller. So you could kind of increase the urban density. I mean, this is a good picture because you can see it's all surrounded by water. You can see it's all the ships. It was built for water transportation. And you see that there's not a lot of green space. Just on your left-hand side, just this little park down there is some of the only recreation space, and everything else is this built environment. And you can contrast this, so remember what this looks like versus this. This is an earlier picture of New York. See how the building's not quite as tall. Little bit more green space down here. Still this concentration of, you can see kind of like the shipping, the boat traffic. But that's just kind of like a comparison from this to kind of how the city got built up this way. So that's a little bit of what the cities looked like. Okay, now talking about density, this idea of dense population, this kind of happened because of land values, because this centrally located land, this land that's where everything has to be close together, it's really valuable. So the builders wanted to use the minimum amount of land for any given structure. And this led to tenement housing. So this is the picture you see here is an example of a tenement house. I mean, really close together, lots of people living in small spaces. So over 100 people might be housed on a plot that's 1/20th the size of an acre. What does that mean? So to kind of give you a visual in your head, I don't know, Dillard's campus is 55 acres. So if you want to kind of break that down, I mean, take the idea of Dillard's campus in your mind, chop it up into 55 pieces, and take one of those pieces and chop it up into 20, and then put 100 people to live in a space that small. Trying to give you trying to visualize what density looks like. Okay, so why is this even a problem anyway? Urban concentration and density. They were viewed as profoundly evil. There's these psychological consequences. Imagine living next to people all the time. What if you lived in one room with your entire family and the neighbor's family, all in one room? People everywhere. You can't get away from them. This is having some psychological consequences. And all of it's the built environment. There's no recreation. There's no parks. There's no spaces to go escape from other people. You had a lot of death and illness. Because you got to think, we're talking about 19th century cities, so this is before water treatment. This is before antibiotics that we have now. This is really before flushing toilets, our whole modern sewage disposal system. So this many people together was a real public health issue that led to a lot of death, a lot of illness. You hear about, like, just the history of New Orleans, these cholera outbreaks that would happen. This was a problem of urban living. And so really this idea, like, people started to think of urban living as inconvenient, unsafe, unhealthy, because you've got these populations crowding into an area much quicker than services can keep up. And services like, like we're talking about, everyone needs water, everyone needs sewage disposal, everyone needs these kind of civil services. So this kind of concentration and density being thought of as evil, this view shaped the direction of urban planning. And this is not just in the United States. You see this a lot in London, like Victorian London. A lot of really terrible, horrible things happening there kind of led to the field of urban planning. So so there was this focus in planning on decentralization. And the electric streetcar was a really powerful decentralizing force. So before, with this idea of cities, 3 miles is about how far a person would be expected to walk for work. So that's the idea of, it's called the walking city. But then you have the streetcar, and all of a sudden, instead of everything having to be in a 3 mile radius, this radius grew. It extended it, and this was really kind of your first process of suburbanization. They called them streetcar suburbs. So that was the focus on decentralization. This slide's a little bit incomplete, but you can kind of track the history of urbanization through transportation. I mean, think of this like walking everywhere, and then we had the horse and buggy, and then the streetcar, and then the automobile. But we'll stop there for right now. I think that's enough for one video. And as soon as I can find my button to stop the recording, we'll pick this up again to look at 20th century in the next slides.